All right. Hey, class. So, for Unit 2, what we're going to be talking about is the Rococo period. And the Rococo period is marked by a few particular characteristics. It is mostly a French movement, though not exclusively. And it's very decadent, it's ornate. It's during a period where the French royalty were very lavish in their art, in their music, in their dining, in their architecture. It's very flowery and highly detailed. And so this period is going to obviously not bode well for all aspects of French society. As we know, the French Revolution is going to start simmering. The American Revolution is going to start simmering during this time period. There's going to be a rejection of some of these French ideals, but some of them are going to remain and continue to prosper as ideas and concepts that we appreciate to this day. So let's start talking about what that's going to look like. And you'll see this in the videos for this week's content. There's a great about 55-minute documentary on the Rococo, and then some other ones on the art of the period that you'll need to watch. But the one item is that the pursuit of happiness, which we know in our Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is an ideal from the Rococo period. If you were to look back at any other period, they would never, the concept of happiness and pleasure and sensuality would never be a priority. And yet, by the time that we write our Declaration of Independence, this is going to become a basic human right in our minds that we have or should be granted the opportunity to find our own happiness. And so this is a pretty interesting philosophical shift. I'd say one that to this day we continue to value with a fair deal of importance. We probably have rejected in some cases some of the decadence associated with the Rococo, some of the abundance, but this notion of happiness, we didn't. So the other thing that you're going to witness and you're going to pick up in the reading and in some of the content is the birth of the salon. And the salon was a room, and it was a room where people would host guests. And this is going to become a pretty important feature as we move towards, at first, so initially, this is going to be for the elite and for the royalty. But as we move closer to the French Revolution, the salon is going to become synonymous with a place where philosophers, and during this time period, it's going to be middle class lawyers as we move towards the French Revolution. People thinking about law, lawyers, thinking about law and new ways to organize governments. And so, as we know, when we start moving into this period, we're going to be moving into the revolutionary period, is right around the corner historically. And so, the salon, something that's going to start from the Rococo, move into a period of decadent house parties, is going to alter itself over the next 100 years into a place where philosophers gather to talk about new notions of law, self governance, and will eventually lead to revolutionary ideals that modern day democracy holds as critical to its beginnings. So that's the Rococo in a nutshell. Moving on, one of the folks that you're going to be learning about is Voltaire. He was a philosopher who caused a lot of trouble. He was a very outspoken critic of the abuses of the Catholic Church, financial abuses primarily, but he was also a very outspoken critic. As we know, the Enlightenment challenges this concept of divine intervention. We see divine right disappearing, but the question of divine in I'm not going to have room here, but intervention. And so Voltaire, very much along the deist clockmaker philosophical bent, is going to argue that, well, he's going to pose the question in this philosophical book. It's a novel. It's a hilarious read, full of humor and entertainment. But Candide, the main character in this story, is an extremely optimistic young man who, throughout the course of the book, goes through a terrible series of tragedies. And every turn, something tragic happens to this young optimist. And so Voltaire is philosophically asking this question about divine intervention: is that, does everything happen for a reason? And meaning, is the hand of God dictating all human outcomes? And Voltaire is going to argue no. And this is partially them leading up. When I say them, I mean the deists and the revolutionaries like the American forefathers. They are going to say no. Everything, kings do not become kings for a reason, or not, at least not a divine reason, maybe an economic reason. And so this conclusion of divine right is really going to have to continue to challenge this notion of, does everything happen for a reason? And so Voltaire is going to say no. If you have, rape and genocide and murder and the death of people prematurely, and torture and all of these horrible things that powerful people can exact, or participate in, those things don't happen for a reason. They just happen, and they happen to suck. And those things that happen don't happen because of God's will. They happen because of human choices. And he is not going to blame God for these things. He's going to blame humanity, and that humanity needs to make better choices in regards to its own self governance, in both a personal sense and in a national sense, with this growing revolutionary period that's coming. So, in this, we also have a guy named Rousseau, famous philosopher. And Rousseau has a lot of ideas that will move along with what I just talked about in Voltaire's perspective that he's going to put into Candide. He's a little bit less concerned with the nature of, as Voltaire would say, optimism, or does everything happen for a reason, that philosophical argument. He's more interested in what makes an individual good. And so if, as Voltaire was saying, it comes down to individual human choices, Rousseau is going to say, okay, he's not going to be as worried about the divine intervention part. He's going to be more concerned about, what does an individual need to consider or do or be aware of in order to be a better human being and lead a better life. Also going to be, Rousseau is going to be philosophically important to the American Revolution, but the some things that are going to, you'll see Rousseau is very much going to be the roots of the next philosophical period after the Enlightenment, is going to be the Romantic. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. The Romantic period here. In the Romantic period is going to hold a lot of these same values that Rousseau is going to talk about. And these values are going to become the Romantic ideal, or Romanticism is going to be a predominant philosophy for the foundation of America. And so we're going to be talking about this quite a lot over the next couple of units. But those include this notion that civilization corrupts, that people who can free themselves of civilization and go into nature, or have an existence within nature, will stop comparing themselves and stop the decadence that civilization and technology can create, and they will therefore become better people. And he also advocate strongly for the innocence of children, and that education should be child-centered, and not, that all children are little spawns of Satan that must be controlled until their first baptism, when they become purified. That instead, children in and of themselves are the epitome of purity and goodness, and that we lose that goodness as we travel through the poisons of civilization. And you'll see all this come out, as I said, in Romanticism. But that's just a quick breakdown of Rousseau's philosophy. And then finally, the last person we're going to talk about here is Mozart. And you're going to learn a little bit of biographical information about Mozart, who he was, what his influence happened to be in music. And you'll, through that process, you'll get to listen to a little bit of Mozart. In many of the coming units, you'll be listening to various classical artists as we move through. It won't just be classical music because we're going to get up to modern day. So we're going to hit jazz, we're going to hit even rock and roll. And so we'll talk about how music starts to influence and exhibit or illustrate all of these philosophies and the politics and how all of this stuff. I mean, whether you take literature, philosophy, political science, where people like the salons practice philosophy, these things start to become intermingled, and this intermingling happens to be culture. So, all right, as always, let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy this unit.